How we think, it's obviously it's a big complex topic. So in this small set of slides here, but really just going to scratch the surface around some aspects of it. I'm really going to keep it at quite a high level, thinking about some of the conceptual aspects around this. But nevertheless, these are useful, in fact essential conceptual aspects when we're thinking about how we design software so that it will work better with our users. So you and I, we create and we use mental models. So these mental model is something that brings together our thoughts around how it could be an item, an object, or some process, how it's going to behave, how it works, how it's going to react to different types of activity or stimuli or input. And we use our mental models then to reason about how we interact and how we use things. What types of behavior are we going to engage with? What actions are we going to do? And it really then shapes how we approach different things. So if I give you, for example, something that looks like a remote control, then you will automatically have a sort of a mental model in your mind as to how you would use this, what it can be used for. So we use our mental models. They help us then predict how something's going to behave. They help us shape how we interact with it. And we create mental models really very, very quickly. It can quite often be based on our prior experiences. We think this is similar to something we've done in the past, so it's probably going to be the same when we take a mental model and we use that. Or it's based on certain assumptions about how we think something's going to be operating. And we also are actually quite sensitive to the view of others in terms of shaping our mental models. If we hear other people talking about things or expressing certain sentiments, we can integrate that quite easily into our mental models as to how something will operate. And they do change over time. That's one of the important aspects. And they also differ across individuals, which is to say I could give the same object to different people, and their mental models about what that object will do and how it can be interacted with may not be the same. There may be some commonality, there's probably going to be some differences as well. From a designer's point of view, I'm looking at ourselves then as both users but also here as designers. When we're designing a particular product, we design it using conceptual, or also known as represented models. So this is a model of how we anticipate the user will interact with it. And they can differ. In fact, often they do differ from mental models. So we may have the designer saying, okay, I'm going to design this particular product, say software product. I'm anticipating the users will use it in this particular way for this particular purpose. And that may apply to most users. It may not apply to all. In fact, it may be widely off the mark. The one thing we do know though is where there is a mismatch between the conceptual model that the designer is using and the mental model or models that the users have, that's going to result in usability issues. It's going to use where the user's thinking it'll react in a certain way or can be interacted with in a certain way, and it turns out not to be the case. So from the designer's point of view, it's incredibly important to understand what mental models the users are likely to use or in fact do use. And later on in this course, we'll actually spend a good amount of time looking at how we can model the goals and the user models associated with our users and getting into personas and other types of modeling technique. If you have something that is truly novel, where you think, okay, that this genuinely is new, it's inventive, the user's unlikely to have a well-defined mental model for this, then that's also something you want to think about. Well, how do you shape and influence and develop the user's mental model so it maps well onto the conceptual model that is being designed with? Cognitive load's another aspect about how we think, and this is something we've talked about through some of the earlier videos. As users, interact with software, they engage with that. They do a range of different activities, and those activities, we can classify them crudely as cognitive activities, where they're thinking about something, they're remembering information. We also have visual activities, where they're looking to find a particular piece of information, or trying to sort of look at the structure of something and understand it. There's also motor actions as well, where they're touching an interface, they're moving a mouse pointer, they're clicking on something. So each type of different type of action, it comes along with, you can sort of view it as a certain amount of mental effort associated with it. Some things can be done quite easily, almost effortlessly. Other things the user may really struggle with and find it quite challenging and be a real obvious cognitive demand on them. Certainly you can crudely, and this is crude, you can crudely say that cognitive loads in terms of thinking and remembering, they have a higher cost than visual, and visual has a higher cost than motor, if you want to sort of do things in that perspective. So when we're designing our software, we want to think about this, and we want to minimize the overall cognitive load. And sometimes then you get into quite useful trade-offs where you might have a couple of extra mouse clicks, but if those couple of extra mouse clicks mean that the user has a less significant cognitive load, they don't have to remember something that they may forget, then that's actually a good trade-off. So as we go through this here, we always want to think about what is the user thinking about, what are we requiring them to do, what are we requiring them to look at visually, how are we requiring them to interact, and we're trying to make it as to minimize this in terms of the overall mental effort that's required. Progressive disclosures is a technique you can use to actually help this process. With progressive disclosure, it means that you're only presenting the user with information when it's needed or when it's relevant. So in that sense, you avoid the risks of presenting the user with too much information, or of having a lot of stuff on screen where it's hard to sort of navigate through it. You only show them what they really need at that particular point, or what it is they're looking for. So that's fantastic, really, really good, gives you a good way to lessen cognitive load. It does, however, mean from a design point of view that there's much more emphasis then on the designer being able to accurately understand and predict what the user is going to need at each particular stage along the way, to say that, okay, at this point, this is the information the user is going to want and need to have. So in that sense, if there's a mismatch between our sort of represented conceptual model and the mental model that the user is using, that's going to be a hard overall task. But if you can model it accurately, then that means that progressive disclosure offers a really good way of making it cognitively easy. Our minds wander a lot, they really, really do. So in that sense then, it's a bit like daydreaming, where we could be doing an activity and then we think, oh, we'll do something else. We'll sort of start and stop doing a task. The reality is we can probably only focus on things for like 5 or 6 minutes at a time, and that's optimistically. And after that, then we will naturally wander to do something else and then come back to it. And if you ever sort of try to mentally think about how you're doing a process, you will notice that your mind does wander quite frequently. So it's a very common phenomena. We all do it. Every single user will do it. It's not something we can avoid. It's not something we would want to avoid, but it must be something then that we will try to support as best we can through our application. So what does that mean? How do we support it? Well, in terms of mind wandering then, it means that within our design, we want to make sure we're including lots of elements that help the user orientate themselves quite quickly, so that if they open up a web page, check something on their phone, and then come back to the application, that they can very quickly pick up whereabouts they were, and to be able to move on from that particular point. So that brings us to the end of this particular one. For the next one, we're going to have a look at actually how we focus on particular activities, and that's going to link into a little bit to mind wandering.